Robert Carlin is a visiting scholar at Stanford University who's been following North Korea for a quarter of a century. He's visited the so-called Hermit Kingdom 25 times, and among his many roles with the US government, he was once an analyst with the Central Intelligence Agency. He joined me a short time ago from Washington. Robert Carlin, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Is there a clear succession plan in North Korea, and if there is, can we be certain of it?
There is a clear succession plan. It's been underway for several years now. It seems to have been on track as of Friday afternoon before events in Pyongyang. And now the question, obviously, is how firm were those pieces put into place, and will they withstand the pressures of the next several months?
What can you tell us about Kim Jong-il? He's 29 years old. Obviously, he's been groomed for some time now. And does he have power in his own right?
He does seem to have some power in his own right. It looks very much like the succession scenario they followed for him was somewhat similar to the one they followed for Kim Jong-il when he was taking over from his father. That is, to put elements of the military and the security under his control, or at least to gather those forces around him so he could depend on them completely as he took the final steps of the succession. Whether or not they succeeded in doing that, we'll have to see.
So what are the security risks at a time like this?
The biggest security risk is that everybody is suspicious of everybody else. North and South Korea are nose to nose across the DMZ. And as I said, when troops go on alert, everybody is told to be prepared to react more quickly. And the likelihood of an incident grows a little bit, and as the likelihood of an incident grows, so does the possibility of escalation.
Is there a possibility that we might see a more open North Korea after this?
Well, it's possible down the line. I wouldn't expect it in the near term. I would think that in the near term they have to do a lot of putting of the furniture in place, because when you open up, you're exposing your underbelly. And they're not going to want to do that in the immediate period of succession, I wouldn't think.
Isn't that the problem when you're talking about North Korea, that in fact, to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, what we're talking about mostly is unknown unknowns?
Well, some things are unknown, absolutely right. And all we can do is flounder and speculate about them. But there's a lot we do know. There's a lot of information available about North Korea now. Certainly more than there was 5-10 years ago. Many more people are getting in there. You can look on the internet and find blogs and all sorts of pictures of the place. And certainly their own people have much more exposure now to the Chinese. There's a big flow of people and products back and forth. So the idea that they're completely isolated from the world is a mistake, and it's a dangerous mistake for us to make.
What are the equations that are being made at the moment in the security meetings that we know are taking place? In Japan, for example, they're having a security meeting. The Americans are saying they're looking at this very closely. Obviously, the South Koreans would be looking at it more closely than most. So what are the sorts of calculations, do you imagine, that are being made by those leaders at the moment?
There's a hypothesis that people grab for in a situation like this, and that is during a period of extreme domestic uncertainty, a regime like that in North Korea will provoke some sort of incident externally in order to convince its own people that they need to rally around the leadership. In other words, they need a boogeyman on the outside so they can keep their own people in line. We didn't see that when Kim Il-sung died in July 1994. In fact, we saw almost the opposite. We saw the North Koreans coming back to the table with the Americans in Geneva in September, in August and September, and we had an agreement, a very important agreement with them very quickly. And I remember that quite well because I was in Geneva at the time in those talks. So the great fear of hostile action wasn't borne out in that circumstance, and I don't know at this moment we have reason to expect it necessarily will this time either.
It can seem to an outsider, and this might be a naive statement, but that sometimes North Korea behaves like a spoiled child. It will pull something on in order to get the world's attention. Well,
the problem is most spoiled children learn that that actually works. What frequently happens is we reinforce that tendency of the North Koreans. When nothing is going on, in fact, we ignore them. Rather than engage them when they're being good and try to solicit more of that behavior, we sit back and do nothing. And their calculation is if they do something and get our attention, we'll re-engage. And I'm very much afraid that's exactly what happened at the end of 2010. We weren't really engaged with the North Koreans up until that point. They took drastic measures against South Korea. They got the South Koreans very angry at them. They got very stern lectures from the United States. And then a few months later, what did we do? We called for meetings with them. So in their minds, they're not spoiled children. They're simply pulling the proper strings in order to get our attention and get us to re-engage with them.
Well, happily, Robert Carlin, most spoiled children don't have nuclear weapons, but we'll have to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. You're right.